And the Stoics thought that when we pursue things in life, when we undertake activities in life with this caveat, with this qualification, saying, I'm going to do the very best that I can, but I acknowledge that I'm not guaranteed to succeed, then it prevents us from getting all flustered and upset if things don't turn out.
Hey guys, today our guest is Donald Robertson. Donald Robertson is one of the world's leading thinkers, writers and practitioners of Stoic philosophy. Donald is an integrative psychotherapist and trainer who specializes in the treatment of anxiety and the use of cognitive behavioral approaches to clinical hypnotherapy. He is the author of a number of articles on philosophy and psychotherapy in professional journals, and is the author of books including How to Think Like a Roman Emperor and the Philosophy of Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, etc. I am very happy to invite Donald Robertson to the show. Thanks, Donald, for coming to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very much looking forward to our chat.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, before we go into the interview, can you share where can people connect with you?
Oh, sure. If you go to my website, it's really easy. It's just donaldrobertson.name. So it's my name. And then instead of .com, it's .name, N-A-M-E. And they can find all my social media and courses and articles and everything they want there.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, my first question is, can you define what is Stoicism to a layman?
Yeah. So I'll give you, first of all, a very brief history of it, and then I'll explain what it is, very brief. So Stoicism is an ancient Greek school of philosophy that was founded in 300 BC by a guy called Zeno of Citium, who was shipwrecked at Athens. And it's very much influenced by the earlier philosophy of Socrates. So that's a tiny little potted history of it. But what did these guys believe, these Stoic guys? So they believed that virtue is the only true good. And what they mean by that is that they think people in general place too much importance on external stuff, mainly wealth, reputation, all that kind of stuff. And they think we've all got it back to front, and we should be placing much more importance on the way that we live our lives, on our character, and ultimately on the achievement of moral wisdom. And they think when we turn around like that and we put more importance on the achievement of wisdom, enlightenment, you could say, than on wealth or reputation, then the main consequence of that, and that's an ethic, that's a set of values, the main consequence of that ethic is that we will become more emotionally resilient as a result, because someone who's enlightened and really prizes wisdom more than wealth or reputation is going to be relatively unperturbed if they go bankrupt or if their wife divorces them or something like that. It's not going to be the end of the world for them, because their values are different. So it's an ethical philosophy that creates or contributes to emotional resilience and mental health.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, what do you say to the people who say that principles of Stoicism cannot be applied in the present day?
Oh my goodness. Where are these people? They should come along and meet all these Stoics that I meet everywhere. Stoicism has become very, very popular. When I started doing it, it wasn't so popular. Now everywhere I go, I meet people that are practicing it. So I just listen to them. They tell me that it benefits them enormously. Now, I would say there's a reason for that. The ancient Stoics, because they had what we call a virtue ethic, it means that they're focusing on developing character traits. That means that the Stoic philosophy is kind of timeless, because people generally agree that wisdom is a good thing. Nobody's going to go, well, wisdom used to be a good thing, but it's not really relevant today. Throughout the ages and across cultures, we can agree that moral wisdom is a good thing. We might disagree about what it looks like in practice, but the Stoics would say, well, that's fine. It's okay if we disagree what it looks like in practice. The main thing is that we realize, nevertheless, that that's the goal of life. So the moral philosophy is kind of abstract or generic in a sense, and that means that it's also somewhat timeless. And it also lasted a long time. I said Zeno founded the school in 301 BC. The last famous Stoic is Marcus Aurelius, who died in 180 AD. So that's nearly 500 years. And it was a big thing in Greece. I said it was a Greek philosophy. But it's also, the last famous Stoic was a Roman emperor. So it flourished in Greece and throughout the Greek-speaking Mediterranean, and then also throughout the Roman Empire as well. So in many different countries, among many different races of people, speaking different languages for 5 centuries. So that kind of shows that it was quite a generic philosophy. Rich people, poor people, men, women were Stoics. And, it's still relevant today with a few adjustments.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, can you explain what is arete?
What is arete? Yes, that's a good question. So it's normally translated as virtue, and that's like an old-fashioned translation of it. When we say virtue, it sounds a bit, I think it reminds a lot of people of virtue in Christianity. I feel like it sounds a bit Victorian and a bit kind of stiff in a way or something, right? And the Greek word is a little bit different. I think a better translation of it would be moral wisdom, because for the Stoics, arete is virtue, but virtue is comprised for them of certain understanding, about really understanding what's good, bad, and indifferent in life. They got this idea from Socrates. It's a cognitive or an intellectual theory of virtue. The virtues consist in knowledge or understanding. So really, arete is a kind of moral wisdom, and the Stoics say fundamentally, if I was going to explain this to my little girl, I have a 9-year-old daughter, I would say to her, look, wisdom, I think, consists in really understanding what's genuinely important in life, and also understanding that some of the things that other people think are important maybe aren't actually as important as they believe them to be. And that's basically what the Stoics say. They say that wisdom is knowing the difference between good, bad, and indifferent things. Yeah, so I think they were right about that. And I guess a corollary of that, a consequence of that, again, is if you really grasp this fundamental moral wisdom, that's the essence of arete, then you would also potentially develop the virtue of justice, fairness, and kindness towards other people, because you would understand what's really important in terms of our relationships with our friends and other people and society in general. And you would understand, you would develop the courage, the virtue of courage and self-discipline, because you would understand what's really important in terms of our feelings, our fears, and our desires, and that things that we desire strongly maybe aren't as important as they seem, and so on. So this knowledge about the value of things helps us to develop not only fundamental practical wisdom, but also social virtue or justice, self-discipline, and courage, according to Socrates and the Stoics.
Donald, what is the goal of life according to Stoics?
Oh my goodness. These are very profound questions. This is a big one. That's the big question, the telos, we call it in Greek. So the goal of life, as the name implies, is the important thing, like the really important thing. It's kind of like saying the meaning of life. You've just asked me what the meaning of life is, buddy. That's a big question. So for the Stoics, the goal of life is arete. Like, they think that's what we should be seeking. And Marcus Aurelius, for example, is always telling himself that he has a natural tendency to drift off to the side, like to go and I'll just go and watch Netflix instead. I'm going to park the goal of life. I'm going to go and watch some Netflix. I'll go on Facebook for a little bit. And Marcus says that we have to keep giving ourselves frequent reminders to get back on the right path, to get back on the path towards achieving enlightenment or moral wisdom, like whatever you want to call it, because that's our goal. Like, it's a goal that we constantly stray from if we're not paying attention.
Yeah. Who is an ideal sage?
Who is an ideal sage? Nobody. The Stoics say that he's as rare as the Ethiopian phoenix. That's what they say. And the Ethiopian phoenix is really, really rare because, according to legend, it was only born every 500 years. And Stoicism didn't quite make it to 500 years. It was 20 years short. Like, it lasted 480 years, like the ancient Stoic school. So that's very rare. And the Stoics don't really believe that anyone is a perfect sage. And that's an unusual idea. But it's an important idea. Other schools of philosophy were named after their founder, like Pythagoreanism, named after Pythagoras. Epicureanism, named after Epicurus. But the Stoics weren't named after their founder. They were named after the place where they met, the Stoa Poikile. It's a painted porch down the road from me in Athens, actually, not far from here. And that's because they didn't want to make it a personality cult. They wanted even the founder to acknowledge that he was flawed. And Seneca, I think, describes this very well in one of his letters. He says to his friend Lucilius, "Don't look at me like I'm a physician, an expert with all the knowledge. Look at me like I'm a patient in the hospital in the bed beside you, and I've just been having my treatment for a bit longer than you have, so I can share my experience of how my journey is going, even though I'm not completely cured yet." So it's like what we call a peer support relationship rather than an expert-student relationship. And I think that's how all the Stoics, even the founders of Stoicism, understood what they were doing. And that was very healthy, because it kept it as a philosophy where people have to depend on their own thinking rather than worshipping a kind of guru figure.
Got it, Donald. Thank you for answering that. Donald, how did Stoics view joy?
Joy is surprisingly important in Stoicism. So people think the Stoics would be kind of joyless, but they're really not. And they talk a lot about joy, gratitude, love, friendship, and I guess what we would call positive, healthy emotions. I'm going to say something quite radical, actually, because I like to say things that get people to think, you know. I think Stoicism is a philosophy of love. I think Stoicism can be understood, could be interpreted as a way of making love wise and rational, like of learning how to love wisely. And Marcus Aurelius is on my side, because at the beginning of the Meditations, and he's the most famous Stoic, like he's a late Stoic, but one of the most famous ones, he says of his teacher, Sextus of Chaeronea, one of his teachers, he says that he embodied the Stoic ideal and that he was a man free from irrational or unhealthy passions and yet full of love. Philistorgia is a word he uses in Greek, which means kind of like brotherly love or philanthropic love. So it's clear that he thinks that somebody who's achieving virtue, is approaching wisdom, not an ideal sage, but someone who's a bit closer than him, emanates this kind of brotherly love. And joy is something I think that goes with that. The Stoics experience joy when they experience love. And the thing that they take joy most in is the goal of life. The Stoics think we should avoid or be cautious of taking too much pleasure in things that lead us astray. And we should train ourselves to experience joy in things that are genuinely good. So real joy, rational joy, would be the perception of something that's genuinely good. And the perception, therefore, of the goal of life, of arete, of wisdom. So glimpsing enlightenment would be genuine, profound joy. And we need to be a little bit wary of the type of superficial pleasures that we would get from munching on a piece of chocolate or drinking a beer or, you know, something like that. Like the Stoics think that can lead us off the path if we're not careful.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, can you explain what is time projection?
Time projection. These are all really solid questions. So time projection is a piece of psychobabble. It's jargon that we use in therapy, but sometimes I like a bit of psychobabble. You know, I don't think it does any harm in moderation. So it's a term that we use to describe imagining yourself in the past or in the future. In cognitive therapy, we often get people to imagine themselves in the future. And I would say it's a species, it's a type of perspective shifting technique. And I think perspective shifting techniques are very important because in order to help us spot our own errors, to evaluate our own behavior, to overcome blind spots that we have to, unless we've got the help of someone else, like a mentor or a guide or a therapist, we have to make an effort to try and step back and look at ourselves from different angles. And one way of doing that, an easy way of doing that, is to say, you know, this thing that really annoys you right now, like something that annoyed you really right now, I might say, well, how would you feel about it a week from now, looking back on it? And then I might say, then how would you feel maybe a month from now, looking back on it? And you might say, well, not really, you know, I wouldn't be as bothered about it, Donald. And I would say, what about 5 years from now, looking back on it? And you'd go, oh, buddy, I wouldn't really care about it at all, to be honest. And then I might say to you, why should you feel any differently about something that happened 5 minutes ago than you would about something that happened 5 years ago? And you might say, Donald, that's a crazy question. Like, I have to get upset about it because it only happened 5 minutes ago. And I would say, but why? What difference does it make? They're both equally in the past and no longer under your direct control. So I think by putting yourself in the future and looking back at things, you can train your mind to still acknowledge the same facts. Like, you're not denying the facts, but to feel differently about them, to feel less overwhelmed by the emotions that you have about them.
Thank you, Donald, for answering that. Donald, can you talk about the choice of Hercules?
The Choice of Hercules is a modern name that we give to one of my favourite stories. And this is like a third-hand story, right? Because, okay, brace yourself. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, after his shipwreck, he was very disillusioned. He lost his entire fortune at sea, and he plonked himself down in the Agora in Athens, and he picked up a book at a bookseller's stall and started reading it. He was reading book 2 of Xenophon's Memorabilia of Socrates. So this book that Xenophon wrote, who was a follower of Socrates and a famous Athenian general, and it's everything he remembered that Socrates said. So Zeno's reading this book, and he gets to this part where Zeno describes Socrates retelling a story by one of his friends, a sophist called Prodicus. So this is, I don't know, like third or fourth hand version of this story or something, right? And it's a story about Hercules as a young man getting lost in the woods and arriving at a fork in the road, so he can go left or he can go right, and two goddesses appear. And one of them says, Socrates, if you follow my path, you're going to have an easy peasy life. Other people are going to do everything for you. You'll have enormous wealth. Everybody will love you. You'll never have to lift a finger, buddy. You can lie in bed all day. You can have as much sex as you want. You can have as much food as you want, the finest wine. You know, your whole life is going to be a walk in the park. And then the other goddess comes forward and she says, Hercules, I hate to break it to you, buddy, but if you follow my path, it's going to be hard work. It's going to be tough. People are going to hate on you. You're going to have to fight monsters, a lot of monsters. You're going to have to go down to Hades and fight Cerberus. You're going to have to. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have one of the 12 labours after another to complete. And to cut a long story short, Hercules sits there, has a think about it, and he decides that he'd rather choose the difficult path. Because that goddess is Arete, the goddess of virtue. And she says the other path isn't really going to be satisfying. It's too easy. You're going to look back on your life and regret it. You're going to think that you never really achieved anything of significance. You just wasted your life in idle distractions. But if you are able to rise to these challenges, then you'll become a hero. And you'll be able to look on your own life with a sense of enormous accomplishment. Because you'll be challenging yourself, and that's the only way to really achieve a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in life. So then he completes the 12 labours, and at the end of it, he undergoes an apotheosis and actually becomes a god. So the Stoics, Epictetus put it well. He said to his students, he said, you guys are all lazy and you want the easy option. He goes, Hercules, if he just lay in bed all day under the covers, he wouldn't even have become a hero. You wouldn't even call him Hercules. He wouldn't be worthy of the name. He had to go out and fight monsters and have enemies and things in order to have a challenge to test himself again. Otherwise, how could he have been courageous and self-disciplined and just if he didn't have obstacles to overcome? So that's the parable, if you like, the allegory of the choice of Hercules. And it became famous in the Renaissance. There's a musical piece of classical music about it, and there are a number of works of art that depict it as well. But it symbolises the choice that we're all faced with every moment in our life about whether we're going to take the easy path or the path that's harder, but might actually lead to a greater sense of fulfillment in the long term.
That's awesome, Donald. Thank you for sharing that. Can you talk about Eudaimonia?
Mm-hmm. These questions are getting harder. Eudaimonia now. So that's a Greek word that's actually quite notoriously difficult to translate. So it's usually translated as happiness. And a bit of linguistic trivia. The word happiness, the meaning of the English word happiness has changed over time. So now when people say they're happy, they just kind of mean they've got a big smile on their face and they've got like a warm glow or something. But happiness used to mean good fortune and actually flourishing. And so we still have a trace of that in the English language because we say that someone is hapless, a hapless individual, if they lack happiness. And hapless means wretched, unfortunate. So happiness used to be the opposite of being a hapless individual. It didn't just mean, and so you could say that someone feels happy if they're a drug addict. Maybe they feel really happy because they're high as a kite on heroin or something, but they might still actually be hapless. Like, so someone could be hapless, like, although they feel happy, and so they wouldn't be happy in the classical sense of the word. And that's the sense that we mean when we translate eudaimonia as happiness. It doesn't just mean a big cheesy grin, it means actual flourishing. Right, so the drug addict that's high as a kite wouldn't have eudaimonia, like potentially they'd be in a hapless condition. Eudaimonia literally in Greek means something quite intriguing. It means having a good daemon, which is the word that the Greeks kind of use for the divine part within us. And so it kind of means being in tune or having a good relationship with your conscience or your higher self, or being really in harmony with the highest part of yourself is the original etymological meaning of the word. I think it's not, I don't want to force this comparison, but it's a little bit like nirvana, like in a sense. It's another word that's a bit tricky to translate, but one thing's for sure about it, that eudaimonia is definitely used to refer to the condition of someone who is living the optimum life for a human being. So someone who's achieved the goal of life and is living the best life that they could possibly live in terms of arete and wisdom would be in a state of eudaimonia. And ancient philosophers disagree a little bit about what constitutes that state, but it's the peak state for a human being. And the Stoics believe that the main aspect of it is that we would have achieved arete or moral wisdom. That's what gives us this sense of deep fulfillment that really makes us satisfied in life and signifies that we've really achieved our potential.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, how do Stoics view wealth?
With a take it or leave it attitude. So Zeno said, although virtue is the only true good, he said, wisdom nevertheless consists in knowing the relative value of external things. So Stoics aren't idiots. Like, they know that it's better to be healthy than to be sick, generally speaking, within certain limits. But they recognize that this isn't an absolute truth. It's a kind of rough and ready thing. So wisdom requires understanding the relative value of external things, but also appreciating that sometimes that value can be reversed in different situations. So the Stoics have this list of what they call preferred indifference. It's a bit of a jargon term. So although external things are indifferent, irrelevant, with regard to the goal of life, with regard to achieving enlightenment, wealth doesn't contribute to enlightenment. Nevertheless, like a wise person might reasonably prefer to have enough money than to not have enough, or they might prefer to have enough food rather than to be starving, and so on. But these things are pursued in moderation. And what constitutes moderation might be enough money or enough food might be different for you than it is for me, and it might be different in ancient Rome than it is in modern Toronto or Athens, for example. So these have to be judged more on a case-by-case basis. But there's a paradox about this, which is that sometimes we actually exhibit more virtue by being deprived of some of those things. So if we can endure the loss of wealth and the loss of reputation, it might actually strengthen our character. But again, you have to qualify that by saying, as long as I'm able to cope well with it. So it might cause someone else to struggle and deteriorate if they went bankrupt, if they become clinically depressed. Whereas another person might grow stronger if they've got the state of mind and the strength of character to deal well with adversity. So it'd be like choosing a sparring partner. You don't want somebody who's going to completely overwhelm you, but you want somebody who's enough of a challenge, but not too much. So Stoics think, sometimes it might actually benefit us to do without certain things that we might normally desire. And also, I'll tell you a little story. In ancient Greek culture, in the Greek tragedies, it was taken for granted that there are many reversals of fortune in life. And so Socrates said this is true of life in general. Sometimes people think that they've won the lottery and it's a really good thing, and it turns out to be the worst thing that ever happened to them, because maybe they blow it all on drugs, or they become surrounded by hangers-on, they lose all the real friends and stuff. Or somebody might lose their job and think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them. but it might be an opportunity for them to start their own business, and then they end up much happier as a consequence of that. Socrates' favourite example of that was that he was surrounded by people in Athens who complained that they were poor and they didn't have any status. They were kind of anonymous and they weren't important, high status individuals in society. And they envied the people that had lots of money and status in the society. Then at the end of the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans defeated the Athenians during the lifetime of Socrates and put a military junta in control called the 30 Tyrants. And the first thing they did was round up all the high status people with lots of money and kill them. I think they strangled them in order to take their money and to get rid of them. And Socrates said, all you guys that were complaining because you didn't have enough status, enough money, now you think it's an advantage. Because in another situation, it actually turns out to be a good thing to be anonymous and poor. That saved your skin. So sometimes we shouldn't be too hasty to judge whether something's a good thing or a bad thing. It might turn out to be the opposite of what it appears in the longer term.
Thank you, Donald, for sharing that. Donald, how did Marcus Aurelius dealt with disagreement?
How did he deal with disagreement? Well, he's first of all with effort. Actually, he says that his father, his adoptive father, the Emperor Antoninus Pius, was really good at listening to people. He didn't get upset with people. He didn't rush things. But Marcus says that he himself has a problem with his temper. He struggled to control his anger, but he seems to have used Stoicism as a way of learning to control that. I think he looked at his adoptive father and thought, I wish I could be more like him, but I have anger. And so he found Stoicism as a way of training himself so that he could teach himself through philosophy to become more even-tempered like his father was. And so he wants to strike this balance between paying attention to other people and trying to really understand them in a rounded way, but not being too preoccupied with the opinions of other people, remembering that he always has to ultimately fall back on his own judgment. So he does two things that he has to kind of balance that seem like they're in competition. He says you have to kind of try and really empathize with people and understand them sometimes in life, but then you also have to take a step back from other people's opinions and not take them too personally and not be too easily swayed by them. And so there's not an easy answer to that. It requires judgment and effort and a bit of a balancing act, I think, in life.
Donald, who is a philosopher?
Who is a philosopher? That is both a difficult and an easy question. So in Greek, the word philosopher means somebody, philosophos means somebody who loves wisdom. And so Socrates famously said that he wasn't wise because there were other people that went around saying, I'm enlightened, I'm wise, the sophists, and maybe guys like Pythagoras as well, right, who claim to have perfect wisdom. And Socrates said, I don't have that. I just know lots of good questions. I'm just good at asking people about it. And so Socrates said, nobody can really claim to have achieved perfect wisdom. No human being is perfect. Only God is perfect. But the closest that we could get, the closest thing to achieving a virtue, a perfect virtue, no one is perfectly virtuous, like no one is perfectly wise, is just to really value wisdom. So someone who says, I'm not wise, but I love wisdom and I wish I was wise, Socrates would say, that's good enough, buddy. You're halfway there. That's a lot better than someone that doesn't care. So learning to genuinely appreciate, admire, and love wisdom and to aspire to it, is what philosophy is all about, while simultaneously, paradoxically, acknowledging that it might be impossible to actually attain perfect wisdom. It doesn't stop us from trying to at least move in that direction.
Donald, what's the connection between cognitive behavioral therapy and ancient Stoic philosophy?
That's really fairly easy as well. The early pioneer of cognitive behavioural therapy was a guy called Albert Ellis in the 1950s. He was a psychoanalytic therapist. He got fed up with it. He'd studied Freud and other psychoanalytic therapists that came later. And he got rid of all that and said, I'm going to start again from scratch. Albert Ellis in New York. And he developed a new approach to therapy called rational emotive behavioural therapy. Or at least that's what it became known as later. And it was the earliest form of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the main leading evidence-based form of psychotherapy today. And so Ellis looked around for ideas to develop a whole new school of psychotherapy, and he'd read he'd read Epictetus, a Roman Stoic teacher, and Marcus Aurelius in his youth, and he thought, I could base a form of psychotherapy in part on these things and other ideas in psychology and ideas from Buddhism and things as well. And he took a quote from Epictetus that says, it's not things that upset us, but rather our opinions about them. And he used that to express the central premise of rational emotive behaviour therapy, which we call today the cognitive theory of emotions. It's not things that upset us, but rather our opinions about them. And once you recognise that, it opens up a whole toolbox of cognitive therapy techniques. So Stoicism and cognitive therapy share this fundamental theoretical premise. And because of that, they arrive at some similar conclusions about how to change or work with beliefs that cause us to be upset.
Donald, can you explain what is reserve clause?
What is the reserve clause? That's a kind of tricky one as well. Like, see, the Stoics were famous for, if you think really hard about things, you really achieve an insight, often it's hard to put into words, because you'll figure something out and you think there isn't really a word for this in English. Like, it's a new idea, it's a paradoxical idea. So the Stoics did that a lot because they thought really hard about stuff and they went, there's not really a word for this. Like, thing I've just figured out. So the reserve clause, hypexeresis in Greek, is kind of this, again, a horrible technical term in Greek. It's hard to translate, but actually they give us some good examples. So Seneca says it would be like saying, if I will go to Athens on holiday if nothing prevents me, or I will go to Athens on holiday, God willing. It's like a Muslim saying inshallah, or in medieval Christianity they said Deo volente, God willing, at the end of letters. So it's qualifying your desire to do something with the acknowledgement that the outcome isn't completely under your control, it's partly in the hands of fate. And the Stoics thought that when we pursue things in life, when we undertake activities in life with this caveat, with this qualification, saying, I'm going to do the very best that I can, but I acknowledge that I'm not guaranteed to succeed, then it prevents us from getting all flustered and upset if things don't turn out. So if I go, I'm going to go to Athens, the boat left without me, I can't believe it, and get really upset about it. Like, the Stoics prepared in advance for failure because they recognise they're not always guaranteed to succeed. And the Seneca and the other Stoics say a wise man or woman undertakes every action with the awareness that the outcome isn't guaranteed 100% under their control.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, now we have questions from subscribers.
Even more, I'm very excited about the subscriber questions. Let's see what they are. Let's do it.
Rob is asking how Stoics deal with anxiety.
With anxiety? They actually have lots and lots of different techniques. So I would say the main one follows from what I said earlier about it's not things that upset us, but our opinions about them. So cognitive therapists originally thought that was just a cool idea. And then they could say, well, we should weigh up the evidence for and against the beliefs that cause us to be upset. So usually when we have a cognitive model of anxiety, and actually the Stoics knew this, weirdly, they were 2,300 years ahead of their time. They said this. So the cognitive model of anxiety that we now also have today says that when people are anxious, the underlying structure, at the back of their mind, they believe something along the lines of something really awful is about to happen and I won't be able to cope with it. So there's a high estimate of the probability and the severity of a perceived threat, and usually the threat has to be looming, approaching soon, not like 20 years from now, and a low appraisal of my ability to know what to do or cope with it. And so that's kind of the theme, if you like, of our thoughts and our beliefs when we're anxious about something. And so cognitive therapy said, well, what we could do is try to question whether that's accurate. Like, so is it actually true that this is probably going to happen? What's the evidence for and against that? Is it actually true that it's going to be catastrophic if it does happen? What's the evidence for and against that? Is it true that you won't be able to cope with it at all? Is there evidence for and against that? And also, like, you know, maybe to give people ideas or inspiration of alternative ways of thinking. So look at other people that have coped with similar problems. How did they get through it? Could you potentially learn from modeling their behavior? So maybe does that improve your perception of your ability to cope? But now in therapy, we actually do things slightly differently, even more simply. So cognitive therapy traditionally will say, where's the evidence for that, and question these beliefs. So if I was to say, oh, this probably isn't going to happen, even if it did happen, it wouldn't be all that bad, and I can deal with anything anyway, then I'm not going to feel anxious, right? But usually these beliefs are not entirely accurate, so we have to question them. But nowadays, what we do rather than that is a little bit trickier to explain. We call it cognitive distancing. And the Stoics actually put more emphasis on this as a way of coping. So cognitive distancing is realizing that if I say something's awful, that the awfulness is something I'm projecting onto the event. Like, my belief that it's awful is like a lens through which I'm looking, and it's not a physical property of the external event itself. It's big, it's small, it's heavy, it's light, it's awful. Those all sound like I'm just describing properties, but it's awful is more an expression of how I feel about it than a description of the external event. And someone else might look at it and think, actually, it's not that bad. And someone else might look at it and think, actually, I see it as an opportunity. So other people might evaluate it differently in that respect. And so realizing that the value judgment or the upsetting belief is something I'm projecting onto the event, and therefore separating my belief from the thing that it refers to, is a little bit harder to describe, but we now believe that's a simpler and possibly a more effective way of dealing with anxiety. I'll tell you a sneaky way of doing it. If somebody say they're anxious at work because they think everybody thinks I'm an idiot. So I'm giving a presentation, I think, oh God, everybody thinks I'm an idiot. Why, that makes me anxious, right? So one way of gaining cognitive distance is to say it out loud in private very quickly for 1 minute. And about 90% of people that do that, everybody thinks I'm an idiot, 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 everybody, but for a whole minute. So once you've done that, it seems like a real hassle to say the words. And then usually people have the feeling that it's an effort to repeat that thought, and they're more aware that it's something subjective and arbitrary, so they gain cognitive distance by doing that. So sometimes we can use actually quite simple little gimmicks, tricks like that, to help people do this quite subtle thing of separating their opinions from external events. I could talk all day about this because I was a specialist in treating anxiety in the past, but hopefully that's one really quick, really simple little technique that people might be able to go away and explore further.
Thank you, Donald. John is asking how to deal with negative thoughts and depression.
How to deal with negative thoughts and depression? Well, negative thoughts in general actually deal with the same way, using cognitive distancing, even if it was a depressed thought. So there's a nursery rhyme we have in England where it goes, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I think I'll go and eat worms. Nobody likes me. And I kind of think those are like the thoughts that we have when we're depressed. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. So we could do the same thing. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me, nobody likes me, everybody hates me. But there's other techniques, there's other gimmicks we could use. So I might say to myself, I notice right now that Donald is saying to himself, nobody likes me, everybody hates me. In order to view the thought as if it's someone else's thought, like to refer to it in the third person, I notice that Donald is saying to himself, and to pay more attention to the process of having the thought rather than getting sucked into the thought. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive therapy, says it's like you are wearing rose-tinted glasses and you forget you're wearing them. So you just go, that guy's pink, that dog's pink, that house is pink, and then someone knocks them off your face and you think, oh, the glasses are pink, right? So gaining cognitive distance is like realizing, no, these are just thoughts that I'm applying to the world. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. This is just like the lenses through which I'm looking. And I could put on a different set of colored lenses and look at things differently, right? It's kind of arbitrary, it's subjective. Like, I'm not really describing a fact about the external world. It's just a sweeping over generalization that I'm making. And so kind of realizing that, you could say to yourself, I remind myself that I'm wearing pink glasses right now. I notice that I'm saying to myself that nobody likes me. I'm having that old thought. So stating it to yourself like that in the third person, stating I'm having the thought. That can help you take a step back and look at it sideways, like rather than getting absorbed and entangled with it. And the other thing that's good for depression is the behavioural side. In modern therapy, we actually put more emphasis on people's behaviour who are depressed. And again, to cut a long, complicated story really short, we now know when people are depressed, they often abandon doing things that they previously found fulfilling. So people who are depressed withdraw from society. They maybe don't hang out with their friends as often. They maybe give up their hobbies. They maybe stay in bed longer. They do things to distract themselves. And so what seems to help is for people to really identify things that they value, like writing poetry or, showing friendship or generosity, things that they could take pride in, and then making a point of doing more of those things each day, even if it only begins with 1 minute each day, even if it's a tiny step, but to find more time each day to do things that you think are genuinely fulfilling and that you could, like in the Choice of Hercules, you could look back at and go, I'm kind of proud of myself for writing that poem today. Nobody thinks, I'm proud of myself for spending all day lying in bed looking at cat videos on YouTube. Nobody's going to say that, right? That's more like distraction. But you might say, I'm proud of myself for writing that letter to my mum. I'm proud of myself for writing a chapter in my book or something, right? So think of things that are actually going to give you a sense of fulfillment and achievement, and try and make a plan to fit more of those into your day. We call that valued living, like doing things that you actually perceive as valuable. That seems to help a lot when people are depressed.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, Mary is asking how to know the purpose of my life.
How to know the purpose? I can tell you the purpose of your life. That's easy. That's the easiest question you've asked me all day. I can just tell you. The purpose, or at least I'm joking. The Stoics will tell you. They have a very firm opinion about this. It comes back to what we said earlier about the goal of life, the telos. They would say the goal of your life is to achieve moral wisdom. And they would say Socrates has a dialogue about this called the Euthydemus, where he attempts to prove that this is the most important thing. So he asks one of his friends, what does good fortune consist in, is what he asks. So, what are the really important things to have in life? And his friend says, well, that's easy, Socrates. Money, good looks, health, wealth, reputation, rattles off this list. All those things, that's what good fortune consists in. And Socrates says, well, let's pick one at a time, like wealth. Surely wealth is really good if you're wise and virtuous. It allows you to do more wise and virtuous. But what if you're a genocidal maniac and you win the lottery? Surely if you're a foolish or a vicious person, then lots of money would just give you more opportunity to do more foolish and vicious things. It would be like coffee. It allows you to do stupid things more quickly and with more energy. Money is just an opportunity to do more stuff, right? So Socrates then says, maybe this is true of all the other things that you just mentioned, even having lots of friends and power and good looks and all that. And if you use those things well, they're good. But if you use them badly, then they're bad. Therefore, maybe the only thing that's inherently good is knowing how to use things well. So that would be moral wisdom. So Socrates has this argument that tries to convince that the purpose of your life isn't to acquire health, wealth, reputation, all these external things, but rather the purpose of your life is to understand how to use them well, and maybe even knowing how to use the opposite well, how to use sickness and poverty well, because that could be a thing. So the Stoics would say to you, the purpose of your life is enlightenment, it's the achievement of genuine moral wisdom. And perceiving the value of things and knowing how to use them well. And the really important thing is, the majority of us, for various reasons, tend to be tricked by the world, by life, by society, into being mistaken about what the most important thing in life is. We're tricked by celebrity culture, by consumerism, by narcissism, by hedonism, into thinking all these kind of trivial things are the be-all and end-all of life. And Socrates says you need to kind of snap out of this trance, and realize, happiness comes from within, and that's the thing that you should be chasing relentlessly, is the love of wisdom, the attainment of wisdom. That's the purpose of your life.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, last question from subscribers. So Mark is asking, I know what to do, but I don't have motivation to do.
You don't have motivation to do it. Well, there are a number of different ways that people can get motivation. One of them really is, one way, or there are many ways, but one way is to really think about the consequences of action versus inaction. Again, like the Choice of Hercules, but the trick is to think about not just today or tomorrow, but think about the longer term. So if you carry on doing what you're doing, where's that going to lead you tomorrow, the day after, a week from now, a month from now? Where's that going to lead you like a year from now? But then if you change direction and started doing the things that you believe that you should be doing, where's that going to get you tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now? And those two paths are going to get further and further and further and further apart over time, right? And so it's by thinking about the longer, visualizing the longer term consequences. It's about visualizing them getting further and further apart. So tomorrow, it might not make a huge difference. But if you keep following those paths, you're going to end up in two completely different places. And it's by taking that longer view, sometimes that can help to enhance our motivation, because it's not just about the first step that you're taking, it's where it's ultimately going to lead you. Why that's part of the thing that should inspire your motivation, make you feel more strongly about going in one direction rather than going the other. So sometimes really visualizing the longer term consequences can help to increase our motivation.
Thank you, Donald. Donald, last question. Would you like to issue a 7-day challenge for our subscribers?
Oh, issue a challenge for them. Well, like something that they have to do over the next 7 days. Yeah, I would like to. I would like them to, over the next 7 days, think very deeply about the qualities that they most admire in other people. And if they want, they could think about the qualities that they most admire in an ideal friend, would be another way of doing it. You know, or just the qualities they most admire in people in general. Pick what makes someone a really good friend if you find that easier. And then I want you to also ask yourself how many of those qualities you possess yourself, and whether you could begin one small step at a time to try to embody some of the qualities in your own life that you most admire in the lives of other people.
Thank you so much, Donald. Donald, before we leave, can you once again share where can people connect with you?
They can just go to my website, which is donaldrobertson.name, N-A-M-E, and they'll find everything there.
Thank you, Donald, for coming to the show and helping us become more enlightened.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can you subscribe to bnsgokugreat?